I never imagined that my rock bottom would be in a jail cell, bars, shackles, and all. And even then, I was locked up, but I was never locked out of God's grace. His grace completely changed my life and reminded me that even a prison can become a platform for God's purpose. And just like God showed up for Joseph way back in the book of Genesis, he showed up for me in my darkest place. And trust me, if he did it for us, he'll do it for you too, because his grace never misses. Let's get into it. Let's get into it.
It's time to see your grace. God, you are great and you are good. Lord, we thank you for our food. By your hands, baby, all be fed. Please give us, Lord, our daily bread. Welcome to Say Your Grace. Real talk that feeds the soul. Real talk that feeds the soul. It's time to say your grace.
Hey, Grace family. It is your girl, Nina Jones, also known as your messenger of hope. On today's Grace Plate, we're serving up a full three-course meal, y'all. Something raw and deeply personal. So I'm telling y'all right now, go grab your fork, get your cup, because this is going to be heavy. And trust me, on this episode, we will be sipping on a whole lot of grace. Because this isn't just a story, it's a testimony. I made a terrible decision that led to some serious consequences. One that could have literally cost someone their life. But even in my lowest place, God's grace found me. This is my testament of how a jail cell became the setting for one of the most powerful transformations of my life. So please bear with me as I try to get through this, because I already know there are going to be some moments throughout this message that touch me way deep down in my soul, and it'll really be hard to contain those raw emotions. I never thought in a million years that I would end up doing time behind bars. Cement walls, steel toilets, flickering lights, and the smell of stale air that seemed to penetrate through my skin. That first night, I was just a number in the system, sleeping on the floor next to a toilet with nothing but a flat blue mat and an itchy wool blanket that felt like a Brillo pad. People stepped over me like I didn't exist. And in that moment, I wasn't a wife, I wasn't a mother, I wasn't a daughter. I was just someone who was broken. It started out like any other Friday night. I had just wrapped up a long work week, tired but still craving some kind of release. You know how it is. You just want to shake off the stress, laugh a little, dance a little, feel something other than pressure. I had convinced myself that I deserved a little fun, a little freedom, a little me time. And at first, that's all it was: music, laughter, drinks flowing. But somehow, the notion for just one more drink put into motion the dreadful one too many. I was way past my limit. And instead of calling an Uber, instead of texting someone to come get me, I made a foolish decision to drive myself home. So I grabbed my keys, got behind the wheel of my car, and told myself, I'm fine. I just need to make it home. But I wasn't fine at all, not even close. I only made it a few blocks up the street, and I still don't know whether I swerved to avoid hitting another car or if I simply blacked out behind the wheel. That's how impaired I was. All I remember is the sound, that sickening crunch of metal on metal, glass shattering, my body jerking back and forth as my car ricocheted from one side of the street to the other. There was a big boom and then silence. When the car finally stopped, I stumbled out of the wreckage, bewildered as ever, trying to desperately regain my composure. My adrenaline was at an all-time high. I looked around and realized that I didn't just hit one car, but I hit multiple parked cars. I believe it was 5 in total. Both sides of the street looked like a demolition derby, a trail of mass destruction. I sat on the curb stunned, hands shaking, heart pounding out my chest, crying uncontrollably. Talk about a sobering moment. Miraculously, only by God's grace and mercy, no one was hurt, not even me, except for a few scratches and bruises on my hands and arms, mainly from the impact when the airbag deployed. Then came the flashing lights and all of the rapid fire questions. Then the field sobriety test, which I failed one after the other. And last but certainly not least, I heard the gut wrenching words, "You are under arrest." I was booked, fingerprinted, and charged with driving while intoxicated, reckless driving, and destruction of property. And in an instant, the life I had worked so hard to build unraveled right before my very eyes, like a spool of thread. I had to resign from my job of almost 25 years. My driver's license was revoked. The shame was unbearable. From the time I was released out on bond to the day I stood before a judge, I felt like I was free falling with no idea where I would land. A series of days marked by anxiety, regret, and the constant fear of what was coming next. But the worst part wasn't the court dates or the consequences. It was the guilt. The fact that I knew better, that I could have killed someone, that I could have lost everything, including my own life. And in many ways, I did. My spirit was crushed, my ego bruised beyond recognition. But even in that place of deep despair, grace had already started to work. The evidence against me was overwhelming. So, at the advice of my attorney, I took a plea deal. Now, for those of you who don't know what a plea deal is, think of it like this. Instead of going to trial and risking a harsher punishment, you make a deal with the prosecutor. You admit to what you did, and in return, you might get less time in jail, avoid certain charges, or have a quicker resolution to your case. So when sentencing day came for me, I already knew I was going to jail for 120 days. I had never felt more uncertain, more ashamed, and more afraid. It was like walking into a storm, knowing I couldn't turn back, but also not sure if I would make it through. Today's grace plate isn't just about the fall, it's about how God allowed me to hit rock bottom to let me know that He is the rock at the bottom. When the walls of that jail closed in around me and I thought the life I once knew was completely over, that's where God stepped in. That's where the real transformation began. The first night in jail, as I mentioned before, I slept on the floor next to a toilet. Just a flat blue mat that felt like it had been used 1,000 times, and an itchy wool blanket with the rough, knotted balls all over it. No pillow, no sheet, no privacy, just concrete fluorescent lights, and silence that screamed. I pulled that blanket over my head, trying to shut it all out, but the truth was loud in my spirit. You are not going home tonight. I cried silently into that mat, my back curled to the cold wall. My heart was drowning in shame. Y'all, the reality hit hard. I was really locked up, and it felt like the final chapter in a story I never meant to write. The next morning, fortunately for me, someone had got released and a bed became available. So I was able to move to a top bunk near a tiny obscured window, the kind of window that lets in just enough light to remind you the world is still turning without you. But through that window, I could see the top of a church building across the street. And in the arches of that church was a clock. Every time I looked at it, I was reminded, even in a dark, hopeless place like jail, where it feels like time is standing still, God is still in control. Jail was so chaotic. Those first few weeks were a nightmare. I was in complete and utter culture shock. Loud, violent fights broke out almost every day. Women doing drugs, others making out openly, screaming, cursing, you name it. The food was barely food. A tray slapped together with watery beans, hard bread, some mystery meat. Some of it was even unrecognizable, but they made us get up 3 times a day for it anyway. No matter if you were sick, sad, or sound asleep, you had to get up. But thank God for my family. They all chipped in and made sure I never had to eat that food. Every day they ordered hot meals for me from an outside vendor affiliated with the jail. Chicken wings, subs, pizza, Pepsi, even carrot cake on some days. That was definitely love delivered in a styrofoam box. And mind you, those meals weren't cheap either. The cost mounted up real quick, and I would never forget the love and kindness my family displayed for me. I stayed to myself, stayed on my bunk, didn't talk much, definitely didn't argue, and didn't try to prove to anyone that I didn't belong there. Instead, I wrote poems in real time. I prayed and I read my Bible, all to help keep my sanity. And in the stillness of that top bunk, with chaos buzzing all around me, God began to whisper, not in thunder, not in fire, but in pages turning, in verses jumping off the page like love letters from heaven. My tears fell without warning, not from pain, but from realizing that God still sees me and He was right there with me, smack dab in the middle of my mess. And then that's where the shift came in. You know, one Sunday morning, a reverend from the prison ministry came walking past our block, calling out softly, Sunday school. Anybody want to go to Sunday school? That first time I didn't go, but throughout the following days, something kept tugging at me. It was like a seed got planted and all it needed was a little water. So the next week, when she came back, I was eager to go. And that one class changed everything. Not only did I show up, I sat close to the front. I listened. I felt God's presence. And when she asked if someone would close us out in prayer, I immediately raised my hand. That prayer unlocked something, not just in the room, but in me. By the second week, word had spread. Miss Nina knows how to pray. That's what they started calling me, Miss Nina. From that point forward, I ended up being the main person that led the class in prayer. I also became the one the other inmates came to before court dates. Miss Nina, can you pray for me? My baby is sick. Miss Nina, will you pray? Or some just needed to talk about personal issues. I was that girl in jail. Even the deputies respected me. One of them said, "What on earth are you doing here? You don't even look like you belong here." But the truth be told, I did belong in there. I deserved those consequences. But even in that place, God gave me purpose. God needed to sit me down in a place where I had no choice but to be still and listen. And this is where I met Joseph, not face to face, but in the pages of my Bible, Genesis chapters 37 through 50. His story jumped out at me like a mirror. See, Joseph was his father's favorite, clothed in a cloak of many colors, full of dreams and destiny. But that same favor made him a target. His own brothers plotted against him. At first, they wanted to kill him, but instead, they sold him into slavery and lied to their father, saying he was dead. Imagine that, betrayed, rejected, abandoned, not by strangers, but by family. Joseph ended up in Egypt working in the house of a man named Potiphar. Even there, God's favor was on him. He rose to a position of leadership, trusted and respected. But then came the false accusation. Potiphar's wife kept trying to entice him to sleep with her. And when Joseph refused her advances, she lied, saying he attacked her. And just like that, he was thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit. Innocent, forgotten, behind bars. I read that story and it was so profound because even though our situations were different, the pain felt familiar. Joseph was wrongfully accused. I was rightfully convicted. But both of us ended up in the same place, a prison cell, surrounded by people who didn't care who we were before. And still, God was right there. In that prison, Joseph didn't let bitterness win. He didn't stop dreaming. In fact, he became a dream interpreter, literally. Joseph's gift for interpreting dreams became his ticket to purpose. And what was meant to break him became the very thing that positioned him for greatness. Check out this grace in action. Two fellow inmates, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, both had troubling dreams. And Joseph, full of divine insight, he explained them both. He told the cupbearer he would be restored to his position. And sure enough, he was. But Joseph asked one thing in return. He told the cupbearer, "When you get out, please don't forget me." But the cupbearer did forget for 2 whole years. 2 years. Oh, and just for reference, Joseph's interpretation of the baker's dream also came true because 3 days later, the baker was executed and his body was left out for the birds to eat on. Eventually, Pharaoh, who was the king of Egypt at the time, had a dream no one could interpret. Suddenly, the cupbearer had an aha moment and remembered Joseph in prison. He told Pharaoh, "There's a Hebrew man who can interpret dreams." And just like that, Joseph was pulled from the pit and brought before the king's palace. He interpreted Pharaoh's dream with clarity and courage. A famine was coming, and Egypt needed a strategy to survive it. Pharaoh was so moved that he elevated Joseph from prisoner to prime minister overnight. Joseph had authority over everything. He managed all of Egypt's resources, especially during the 7 years of abundance and the 7 years of famine. His wisdom saved not only Egypt, but also neighboring nations, including his own family, from starvation. Can you imagine that? One day you're in a jail cell, the next, you're second in command, basically the highest ranking official in Egypt after the king himself, running a nation. That's the kind of transformative grace we serve. What was meant to break him was the very thing God used to bless him. And the same is true for me. My mistakes should have ruined me, but instead, they became the birthplace of my purpose. God took my shame and used it as a sanctuary. He took my sentence and turned it into a stage for his glory. And just like Joseph, I was transformed inside the prison before I ever walked out free. That story helped me so much because I realized, like Joseph, I wasn't buried, I was being planted. And what looked like punishment was actually preparation. And the pit I thought would be my grave was actually my grace place. Lord have mercy. God used me to pray, to teach, and to bring hope. But here's the part I didn't expect. In doing that, he started healing me. I didn't even realize how broken I was. All the years of going through the motions, pretending, pouring into everyone else while silently falling apart. Jail stripped all of that away. The titles, the routines, the noise. There were no filters there, no distractions, just raw, uncomfortable truth. In that space of silence and surrender, God started doing heart surgery on me. My mindset changed. Before, I thought I had to earn God's love. Now I know it's already mine. My heart changed. I used to be hardened by disappointment, bitterness, shame. But prayer softened me. God's word reshaped me. My walk with him deepened. I stopped trying to impress God and I started trying to get to know him up close and personal. Jail taught me how to listen again, not to other people, but to God, to myself, to that still small voice I had been too busy to hear before. I prayed differently, not fancy, long winded prayers, but real ones. God, I'm scared. God, help me not to lose my mind. God, thank you for another chance. I depended on him like never before. Because when you're at your lowest, no phone, no card, no makeup, no schedule, all you got is God. And that's when grace gets the loudest. Not in the sanctuary, but in the cell. Not when you're at your best, but in your brokenness. Let me tell you something. Grace doesn't need perfect conditions to move. It doesn't require a clean track record or a flawless past. It just needs your surrender. I was locked up, stripped of everything familiar, ashamed, guilty, publicly exposed. But I was never locked out of God's purpose. And neither are you. I don't care how far you've fallen, what you've done, or how long you've been stuck. If God can take a prisoner named Joseph and make him a prime minister, if he can take a broken woman like me and birth purpose from my lowest moment, he can do the same for you, because grace does not disqualify, it redeems. And your prison might just be your platform. Your past could be the very thing God uses to set someone else free. After that 120 days, I walked out of that jail with more than a record. I walked out with a revelation. My life had changed forever. I walked out a completely different woman. I knew God was giving me another chance, not just to live, but to live on purpose. But let me keep it real with y'all. I'm not going to act like everything was peaches and cream when I got out, because it was everything but that. I walked back into a world that had kept moving without me. My name stained, my career gone, my confidence fragile, but my faith was stronger than ever. And even though I came out still broken in many places, I was also now planted in fertile soil. Those broken pieces, they weren't trash. They were seeds, seeds of purpose that just needed watering. I could have lost my life that night I got behind the wheel of that car. There's no reason I should have walked away from that crash with only scratches and a few bruises. No reason other than this. God covered me. He covered me then, and He's still covering me now. And that covering didn't mean the road ahead was easy. It took me years to get back on track. I had to go to ASAP classes where I sat in cold folding chairs and listened to stories that were similar to my own. I had to drive with a breathalyzer in my car. Every single time I turned the key, I had to fight to get my driver's license back. I voluntarily started extensive outpatient therapy just so I could dig deep and fully understand the origins of my pain. I had to unpack the shame, the guilt, the why did I let it get this far? I had to show up for those hard conversations with my family and close friends, to apologize, to rebuild trust, and to own my story and hold myself accountable for my actions. And through it all, God never stopped using me. He took what was meant to destroy me and He used it to develop me. Y'all, I'm not gonna lie. Even now, I still struggle sometimes with self doubt, with those sneaky whispers that say, you messed up too bad. You don't deserve to be happy. You're not enough. But every time those voices try to rise up, God reminds me His grace speaks so much louder. Now I use my voice to speak life. I use my past to pour into other people walking through their own dark nights. I share my story not because I'm proud of the mistakes I've made, but because I'm proud of how God turned them around for my good. I'm living proof that you can glow again, that even when everything falls apart, God can and He will rebuild it back better. You may have messed up, you may feel forgotten, but let me remind you, you are not locked out of God's grace. And as long as you have breath in your lungs, there is still purpose in your life. So, what does a woman who crashed into parked cars after a night of drinking and a young man falsely imprisoned in ancient Egypt, what do they have in common? More than you might think. Joseph was thrown in a pit by his own brothers, falsely accused by his boss's wife, forgotten in a prison cell, but through it all, God was with him. And when the time was right, God used Joseph's pain, his patience, and his prison experience to position him for purpose, to save an entire nation. Me, I wasn't falsely accused. I made mistakes, real costly mistakes. But God didn't cancel me. He didn't count me out. He did what only He could do. He used it all to bring me back to life. Just like Joseph, what was meant to break me became the very thing that built me. And all I can say is, thank you, Father, for your amazing grace. Because it's only by your grace that I was locked up, but I was never locked out. Thank you, Jesus. Listen, if anything I shared today stirred something in you, if you're going through your own pit season or you're wondering how God could ever use your mess, I want you to know this. You are not too far gone and you are not too broken. You might be locked up in some area of your life, but that doesn't mean you're locked out of God's grace. You are seen, you are loved, and you are still called. If you want to go deeper into my story, the real raw journey that led me from the breakdown to the breakthrough, I wrote it all in my book, The Harvest of Hope, Sowing Seeds from My Broken Pieces. The link is in the description. Please leave me a comment if anything spoke to you today. I would love to hear your story. I would love to pray with you, pray for you, or just remind you that you're not alone. Because this isn't just about my glow up, it's about ours. So let's keep sowing, let's keep growing, and most of all, let's keep glowing. Yes. Whew. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with me today. I pray that this message touched you wholeheartedly. I pray that it was informative, encouraging, and awe-inspiring. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit that like button because it will really help my new channel grow. And it'll also let YouTube know how to connect my grace-filled content with more amazing people like you. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on those notifications because trust me, you do not want to miss the soul quenchers being served up on the next grace plate. Thank you again for joining me. Take care of yourself, be blessed, and go out there and be a blessing to someone else. And no matter what life throws your way, always remember to say your grace. Until next time. Mwah.
Welcome to Say Your Grace. Real talk that feeds the soul. Real talk that feeds the soul. It's time to say